Hey everybody, it's Ken. So 1 year ago, things got pretty serious. Obviously, we all shut down. The pandemic started. The virus started spiking. And you guys know the rest of the story. So here we are 1 year later. And even back then, a lot of economists were trying to predict, how long this recession was going to happen. Was it going to be short term? Was it going to be long term? And there were all these different kinds of recoveries. And so that's what I want to talk to you now about, what I think might be the recovery, on where we're headed, and also potentially some of the problems that we might have as a result of where we are right now 1 year later. So let's first talk about the different types of recoveries, as you guys have probably read about and seen from all the different economists and all the different studies that are out there. The first one, of course, is what they call the U-shaped recovery. So this is a recovery where the business cycle kind of moves along and then it hits down into this recession. This is the average GDP, and this is called the recession trough. And so the difference here, this is basically time. So you really have two things: the gross domestic product, or the GDP, or the output of the business cycle peak, and then how long this is going to happen. This is what obviously everybody thought would originally happen. So the next one that we need to take a look at was the V-shaped recovery. And obviously this is what we wanted to happen, and it did not happen. And that is a real sharp spike from some kind of economic issue like the pandemic. We, of course, didn't know how long it was going to happen, how long it was going to last. Here we are a year later. And of course, the only difference between these two is basically the time. So the first one with the U-shape was just a longer time period. The V-shape, of course, is a shorter time period, and it spikes right back up to become a V. The other one that people thought was going to happen was this W-shaped recovery, which is essentially almost two recessions. So here we are in the peak. We have a time issue here. It briefly recovers, and then we go through another recession, and then now we are in this new peak. Well, that certainly didn't happen here, because what needs to happen here is that everyone needs to rise up, and that's not exactly what's going on right now, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So we're definitely not in a W-shaped recovery, because that's basically a double whammy. That's when we're in a recession, then a mini recovery, then another recession. The next one, which is an L-shaped recovery, which really isn't technically a recovery at all, but I want to show it to you guys. Of course, this is GDP again, and this is time, and this is the line here, and this is the business cycle. And essentially, this is the slow growth. Now, there is a number of people that are actually experiencing this right now, but essentially there's a new term which is called a K-shaped recovery, which is where I think we are right now. And that basically is a recovery that unfortunately is very, very uneven. In other words, some people have gotten through this very well, and some people have not. What we're saying right now is this called a K-shaped recovery, which I agree with. What's really happening is some people are flourishing coming out of this pandemic, and some are not. So in other words, same situation here with this business cycle peak, part of the GDP. We all know what happened. We went into this recession, and some of us came out of it, and some of us are still struggling along, almost like an L shape and a U shape together. But this is basically what they're calling a K shape. So this is the issue that we're having right now. Some industries and some people are thriving through this, and some are not. And some are going to be stuck down in here and are stagnating, even sinking. Some of these people that lost their jobs and are unemployed are going to be in big, big trouble for a long period of time. Hey guys, I know that we threw a lot of charts and graphs and stuff at you here. Just make sure and know that you don't have to take notes. We're going to throw this in the show notes for you. And again, thank you very much for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, the like, all the things we would love for you to do, because these things take a lot of time and effort. Thank you so much. So let's first talk about what is a recession. The recession, if you really want to take a look at it, look at NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research. They're kind of known as the organization that kind of recognizes as the authority of what a recession is or isn't. And what they defined it as is the starting and ending dates of a U.S. recession. Of what constitutes this is a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy lasting more than a few months, normally visible in real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale retail sales, which we have definitely seen. So let's take a look at it visually on this graph. And what this is, as you guys know, I like to use the Federal Reserve of St. Louis charts, and this has another chart that's overlaid with the NBER dated recessions. And these recessions are in the gray here. So you can see on these are all gray. And of course, here we are today. And the blue line is the unemployment rate. So you can see where we are. We're about 8% in 1950. We were somewhere around 10, 11% in 1984, 1985. And as you guys know, we got a lot better. And then we peaked again after the 2008 recession. You kind of see this. This was the leg. This was after the recession kind of hit. And here we are in 2020 through 2021, where we peaked, obviously the highest it's ever been. But now that the economy reopened, people have gone back to work. But in my opinion, we're still pretty high right here if you draw a line all the way across. So we obviously are still not out of the woods, and this is what I want to talk to you about on the lower half of that K part of the recovery. You can't really even call that a recovery, even though the economists are calling this a K-shaped recovery. Really, it's a recovery for a lot of the wealthier people and some industries that are doing very, very well. So you truly can't even really call this a recovery for many, many, many people. Let's talk about the U.S. economic booms and busts, because I think you got to look at this from a big picture to be able to get an idea of the lags and the things that happen. And this is just one more thing. It was horrible what we all just went through, obviously, and that's where we are here. But as you can see, as you go back, we've been here before. We are going to recover. Some industries are going to recover quicker and some are not. And there's going to be lots of economic policy thrown around a lot of this. But this is back in the 1890s recession. We go back to the panic of 1907. There's a lot of talk around the Spanish flu and what happened during that period of time and the economic boom called the Roaring 20s that happened during that period of time. And then the stock market crash, which was in 1929, and then that led us into the Great Depression, and then of course we went into war. So this was a very interesting period of time for you to watch. And a lot of you are going to say, oh, that was a long time ago, that could never happen here. Well, the reason why I put it up here was that you guys can see these periods of economic booms and busts do turn into things. And it has historically, and just because you haven't lived through it doesn't mean it's going to not happen today. So now, as you can see, in the 70s and the 80s, we had this great inflationary period, and I remember as a kid where interest rates were 15 and 20%. You went out and got a car, you might have a 16, 17, 18% interest rate on the money just to buy that car. So obviously we got through that period, and then of course we had the Great Recession in 2008. I went through that. I owned a bunch of real estate during that period of time. So obviously this is as of the second quarter 2020, and here we are in the first quarter of 2021. The reason I pulled this up is because look at where we are, and now we've come up, and this is just the difference between quarter to quarter on the GDP from, let's say, last year to this year. This is a very important piece for you to watch. The question is, how high are we going to go? And where's the economy heading? And how much output and how much business activity and how is the spending and all the things that are going to happen in 2021? Where are we heading? Because that's going to be the big difference on where you want to be for your real estate investing, for your renters, and where you're going to want to move your money. So let's first talk about this K-shaped recovery. So what they're saying in 2021, prior to COVID, 2019, the economy was doing pretty well, no matter where you were on that economic scale. If you were making a lot of money, you were salaried, high paid, business owner, or whether you were working a piece job and working in a restaurant or amusement park, it didn't really matter. Generally, everyone was doing pretty well till about here, which was March of 2020. Then, of course, we hit this economic recession and everybody fell. And the ones we now know that have recovered, and I think it's more important to focus on these industries rather than the people. I know a lot of the media tends to go to the people, and honestly, this is affecting everyone. And so what we really need to focus on mostly are the industries. Not to say that all that stuff isn't important, but really there's massive industries that are doing very well and massive industries that are not. So if you want to invest somewhere, you want to work somewhere, you want to start a career somewhere, you obviously need to focus on the recovering industries and not wait for the industries that need assistance right now today and that are on a lifeline with a lot of government assistance. So here's a couple recovering industries: technology, retail, software services. And when I say retail, what I mean is really direct to consumer or online purchases, not necessarily the big box stores. We'll get into that a little bit later. But retail was really up during the pandemic because people were ordering from home and things were being delivered to their home and they weren't going out and shopping. The industries that need assistance are travel, entertainment, hospitality, and food services. Now, this should not come as a surprise to you guys, but these industries have changed dramatically. All these industries are in various stages of transition. You got the travel industry, which is obviously hotels and airlines and cruise ships and things like that. The entertainment industry, which I have friends that own theaters. They own movie theaters. I have one guy that owns like 60 screens. That's what he calls them, screens. He's obviously in big trouble, and that is he's paying rent to some landlord who's also in trouble. The hospitality and the food service industries, as you guys know, is a lot of piecemeal and very seasonal. These are industries that are going to be changed for a long period of time. So if you're going to stay in these industries, you guys need to know that things like AI and things like that are changing those industries, as a lot of these are going online, they're going on takeout, and things are happening without people as these businesses have tried to figure out how to stay open. On the recovering industries, they need people. So these are industries that you want to be out in front of, whether you're investing and you have renters in that area or whether you just want to change careers. These are industries that you want to be in, because these industries are here. These are definitely recovering. They say that they're not technically in a recession anymore, but these people are definitely still in a recession, and these are mostly in the industries of travel, entertainment, hospitality, and food services. So when you hear people talk about a K-shaped recovery, what we're really talking about are certainly people. What we're really trying to say here is certain industries are going to flourish here and certain industries are not, and they're going to be changed permanently. And what you're going to see is a massive, massive round of discussion and stimulus dollars here. I really believe that we're going to spend a lot more money on these people here. There'll be a tremendous amount of money focused down here. So if you guys have anything in this particular area, you might want to take a look at potentially exiting, changing your focus over the next few years into these recovering industries, these recovering businesses. And by the way, as you guys all know, it's not limited or restricted to just these. There are several others that are doing very well. All you got to do is go look on the internet. So now let's talk about the areas of major weakness. So we talked about how we're having a K-shaped recovery, and some people financially are doing very, very well, and some people are not. So this is the unemployment rate from 2014 to January 2021. It was actually through March 4th, but it's as early as I could find before we were shooting the video today. But again, if you guys look, this unemployment rate is still pretty high if you take a look at. And what they're saying is that we still have about 10 million jobs that are never coming back. These 10 million jobs are simply missing. And as of the beginning of the year, there were about 8.6 million fewer employed than there were a year ago, just before the pandemic began threatening the United States, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What that means is we have about a 10 million person issue right now today. And as you guys know, the economy's pretty much open right now. A lot of the governors are releasing their mask mandates. A lot of the vaccinations are happening. A lot of the states are opening. I understand a lot are still closed, and I understand there's safety issues. And I understand that might not be exactly the case in your particular submarket. From a macro, it looks to be like in the next few months, most of the United States is going to be back open, and I don't actually see this number getting any better. So what we were really taking a look at is we have about a 10 million person unemployment. 10 million people have been displaced. 10 million people are going to be financially harmed over the next period of time. That's going to be a massive weight on the economy moving forward. So if we just look at the hospitality industry alone, almost 4 million jobs from 1 year ago have affected just that industry. And just in that hospitality industry, we have a 16% unemployment rate in just hospitality. If you own real estate investments or rentals in those particular area, the chances of those recovering in the short term are probably not that great. So the big issues facing us right now, in my opinion, is we're going to have some food insecurity here, we're going to have some poverty, and we're going to have equality reaching generational highs as a result of what we just went through. So what does all that mean? If you take a look at the 2021 projections for GDP, but let's first take a look at what GDP is. So GDP, as I said, is an estimate of the total value of all goods and services it produced during a specific period of time, usually a quarter or a year. Its greatest use as a point of comparison: did the economy grow or did it contract as compared to the prior quarter? So GDP can be calculated by adding up all the money spent by consumers, businesses, and government in a given period of time. It can also be calculated by adding up all the money received by all the participants in the economy, so that would be the stimulus money. In either case, a number is an estimate of nominal GDP. And then one thing that you really need to be careful of here is that real GDP actually does not include inflation. It's just the real output, whereas nominal GDP actually is adjusted for inflation, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So let's look at the projections here for the next 9 months in 2021. As you can see from the Congressional Budget Office, what they're showing here is massive expansion. In 2020, what they're projecting here is that the real GDP growth is spiking right now. We're going to actually have a pretty robust, anywhere from a 4 to 5% GDP, not far off of what we saw pre-pandemic. So that's what the Congressional Budget Office says right now. One thing that they did say that I think is really important, and of course this is a guess, is they believe that the number of people employed is projected to return to its pre-pandemic levels in 2024. So what they're saying is that we're going to have a rough few years of unemployment until we get back to that period of time. Obviously, we don't know if this is going to happen or not, but that's what they believe is going to be true at this time. Obviously, that would be great for everybody if that did happen. Another great website is Statista, which I like to show. As you guys have known, I've showed this before. So this was the 2019 GDP. This was the original forecast for 2020 GDP, basically 2.9%. And then this is the pandemic. So this is 2020, and this was the reforecasted 2020. So this is what they thought it was going to be, and this is what it was. So now what they've done is they've taken the original forecast for 2021, which if you take a look at the Congressional Budget Office, from a GDP standpoint, they believe that we're back to where we were pre-pandemic. And what Statista says is they've actually reinstated the GDP to go up another 2%. So they're saying that we should have a GDP growth of 2021. And why is this important, guys? And how did this number get to be? What they're saying is people's savings are up really high, and now that some of the stimulus has hit the economy, that they believe people are going to go out and start spending again, and that's going to give us a tremendous bump. You're going to see this rise in GDP. So now let's take a look at what I think are going to be the real issues moving forward. I think we've got a human factor to deal with as well. So in other words, when the government talks, they talk about real GDP and economic growth. They're talking about real wages, labor productivity, and investment. As you guys know, the stock market is at all-time high, Bitcoin's at all-time high, real estate's at all-time high, mostly in markets that have low supply, which is a lot of markets right now. And as I've said, I think that's going to change. But we still have high inflation, we still have high unemployment, and this current account here, that's our deficit. That's still high. So the only thing really that's doing well is this GDP number, which I just got done talking a lot about, but it's not the only thing. And I think one of the bigger issues that we all need to focus on, and something that we can really help everyone with next year, is this well-being index. And nobody's really talking about this, and that's why I'm talking about the human factor. So these are real things that you guys can help with in 2021 and 2022. And that's life expectancy, happiness levels, and environmental factors. And what we have here is we have real issues going on that not a lot of people are talking about. One is we've talked about the government borrowing and the national debt. We've already discussed all that. But then we have real disposable income for people going down because of these inflation numbers. We have income inequality, which is being talked about right now, and there's going to be more and more policies, I think, going after the rich, taxing them, and trying to distribute this money equally. We got exchange rate issues. We got investment level issues. Here are some things that you really need to watch for next year. I think we're going to have increased poverty. I think we're going to have increased crime. I think we're going to have education levels that have really been disrupted from the quarantine, but also from these kids learning in the Zoom. And also I think people are starting to question, is college even worth it? I think, as you guys know, we have unemployment high. I do think for a lot of you guys that are investors, obviously we're going to have a lot more renters. I experienced this in 2008 when everybody got disrupted. And then of course we have, I think, a mental illness issue as well. So these are real issues that are affecting people, and it doesn't necessarily get reflected in the GDP numbers that I was talking about earlier. But the government is going to focus you there. So if we can do anything here, it's to support the small business. There's 4 million small businesses that are in trouble, that have run out of PPP. I know this is a political hot potato, but there's 31 million jobs that represent small business in the United States. And a lot of these small businesses are in big, big trouble. And they employ people, 1, 2, 3 people at a time, and they need your help. If you guys really want to make a difference, this is the time to embrace entrepreneurship. This is the time to start taking a look at some side hustles. This is the time to start looking at starting a small business that can grow. Some of the best big name businesses that you guys know today all started during recessions or at the end of some of these recessions as the economy came out of this. If you really want to make a difference, start taking a look at what the economy needs, solve some problems, start to be a producer and not as much of a consumer. You can help all these things. You can help all these people just by being in the right place at the right time. So thanks again for listening.